Good morning. We welcome everyone for coming out in this cold. I hope it's a heartwarming parsha that assists us in dealing with their challenge. Page 366. We can find Parshat Beshalach. Parshat Beshalach is supposed to clarify the mystery of why we celebrate a holiday of Exodus for 7 days when the physical Exodus took 1 day. In other words, Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yes, it plays a very significant role in our identity. It's when the Almighty acquired us as a nation. We recognize that and we appreciate that. But the question asked, why do we need 7 days? We left 1 day. We could have had our matzah for 1 day and move on. You might argue that I did all that cleaning. It's just not fun to do it for only 1 day. Something tells me that people would have agreed to have 1 day Pesach, maybe 7 days Shavuos. We have cheesecake instead of matzah, maybe. Why do you need 7 days? So obviously, or 8 days, the way in our condition, in our exile condition. So obviously, this parsha is here to clarify to the people of Israel that the Exodus, Yetziat Mitzrayim, is not complete until Kriyat Yam Suf, until the crossing of the sea. Something occurred then that really clinched the deal. We have finalized our Exodus. What is it about Kriyat Yam Suf? So one would argue, wait a second, even after they left, they're still slaves. They know that there are masters a few miles away. It's just like on a person when he's on vacation. If he has a terrifying boss, right, knowing that the boss could contact him any moment on the phone, he doesn't feel freedom, right? You always can be pulled back. It's a leash. You remember the work days? You remember those days? It's like a leash. There's no freedom. The dog knows that there's no freedom because there is a leash. Slaves, with their mentality, could not feel their freedom until they actually saw the demise of the power of the Egyptians, which occurred at Kriyat Yam Suf. That's a very good basic explanation. But as we know, the Exodus itself was more than just a physical extraction of a nation, but something spiritual is taking place. It's a freedom for us to know our identity. When a person is enslaved to that which is not their true identity, that is the greatest of enslavements. In other words, when you have a person who has an addiction is an enslavement. And even if they believe, yes, what I want now is to go ahead and drink or to consume the drug, that is not freedom. Freedom is to, number one, figure out who you really are. And then, number two, to go ahead and have the ability to take care of that basic need. The Jew finds out, during Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Jew finds out that our essence is this concept of a soul. The desire of the soul is to worship this higher being. So therefore, the freedom of Yetziat Mitzrayim has to be viewed as a spiritual one as well. The spiritual element of the Exodus is only complete at the crossing of the sea. So that's what we're going to have to go ahead and analyze as we go through this week's parsha. What's interesting is that even the introduction to this week's parsha, the first words in this week's parsha indicate that there's a problem here. That the Jews leave Egypt, but the masses are not giving credit where credit is due. And the portion itself that tells us, Rabbi Beshalach Paro et ha'am, as Pharaoh sent out the nation. And you say, wait a second, what kind of introduction is that? Pharaoh sent the people out of Egypt? This is a whole parsha, the one we just read last week, that deals with miracles. The Almighty and His desire to clarify and to show His presence to the people of Israel and to humanity. The appropriate introduction should have been Vayehi behotzi Hashem et bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. Why mention Pharaoh? So if you look carefully in the verse, it does not say Vahi Beshalach Paro et Bnei Israel or Am Israel, but rather it notes that Pharaoh sent out Ha'am, the nation. And as a general rule in Torah, whenever the people of Israel are identified as a nation without being linked to Israel or to God, if they are not called Am Hashem or Am Israel or Bnei Israel, if they are just labeled as an Am, you have a serious problem here, because the Jew viewing himself as a nation like any other nation is the road to trouble. It shows a flaw. It shows that they are lacking something very, very basic. And therefore, in this verse, we are talking about people among the Jews who unfortunately did not have an understanding of their essence. They viewed themselves as in Am. Jews experiencing freedom, but viewing themselves as in Am, we have problems. You know, recently, some of us are reading the book of Yehuda Avner on the prime ministers. Mm-hmm. Right? You're doing your homework?
Yeah. Oh, of course.
Yeah, of course.
I took it out of the library anyway. I haven't opened it.
There's a documentary.
It's too
big,
foreboding. Yeah.
So just go through it. The way you do is like take one quarter at a time. One quarter at a time. It's an interesting book, and I'm not going to give you the review now because I'm supposed to. I have some news for you, which is it's not official yet. Should we make it official, Mr. President?
Sure, make it official. You got your ticket?
I got my ticket.
It's
Yeah.
official.
What happened is that we're supposed to have a book review in a week from the Shabbos, but I've been invited to join the delegation of Harper. Yes. Now, I'm not flying on his jet.
Who else is?
Oh, me with him, with the Fishbones, with the Herringbone group? I sure hope not.
Who else is?
I don't know.
From
It's,
Toronto,
a lot of rabbis, some rabbis that I understand are even going on his jet, on his supersonic jet. I was not zeicha to go on his jet, but I will be part of the delegation. And I'm going to be, and as a result, and I personally was not sure if I should do it or not, but I got pushed. I won't mention
Why not?
by
Oh,
who.
definitely.
By the
shul.
shul. I'm being serious now that it's the shul. I mean, don't worry, we'll build them. But it's the shul believes that it's beneficial. I think it will be interesting.
Yes,
I think that there's
critical.
So, as a result, I will be flying out Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach next Thursday. Thursday the 7th, something like that, 16th, 17th, whatever it is.
No, 16th.
16th. The day, that means the wine class is Wednesday night. Thursday afternoon, hopefully get a ride to the airport, and we'll make it to Eretz Yisrael. Sunday starts the official visit. I hope I don't have to visit Ramallah with them. I personally.
You want to spend Shabbos with us?
You
We're
can be
going
there,
on
Israel?
Thursday.
Going the day before.
We'll be the day before you.
Oh yeah?
Shabbos and Chashmonaim?
Cheshbon, it's near the airport in case we'll have to talk. Anyway, it's interesting what you could take care of in the class. Bottom line is the prime ministers, instead of me giving a class on the prime ministers, I will be meeting the prime ministers. That's what's going to be happening, Bezras
Stay
Hashem.
tuned for the new date.
Stay tuned for the new date. It is too exciting.
Time to read, Josh. Yeah.
What?
Now he has time to read.
Now he has time to read. You hear this?
I'm not going to help
For you,
you.
you can read it now.
Josh is going to have to read it. It's kedai. It's a good book to read. In any event, when you read the prime ministers, and this is something that we mentioned eventually in the review, the author himself goes through several prime ministers that he performs, different significant roles, but he has a special place in his heart for one of them. For Menachem Begin.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, a little bit ironic, and I'll share with you at the get-together why it is interesting in many ways. If you look at the cover, by the way, you will note that he places Begin on the cover, and this is by design, he's much larger than the other ones in height. Look at the cover, and you will notice that, and I have no doubt that there's meaning for that. Now, the type of Israel, he is an observant Jew. And for an observant Jew, he senses that the outlook of the state, of the Jewish state, that someone like Levi Eshkol, Golda Meir, and Yitzhak Rabin had, is very, very different than the outlook of a Jewish state that Menachem Begin has. Totally different. And the difference, in many ways, is the fact of how do we view our Jewish presence. Are we a nation? We happen to be a nation, the nation of Israel, but our goal is to establish a presence, a state, that is like any other nation, and therefore there was a belief that we could actually end anti-Semitism if we become like a normal nation. How do you become a normal nation? This was the vision of Herzl. A normal nation has borders, has soil, has an economy, has infrastructure. If Jews have a homeland, we can become like other nations, liot am chofshi be'artzenu, and that will put an end to the Jewish problem. That was one view. And it's a view that is carried through by the prime ministers of labor, of course, Ben Gurion, Moshe Sharet, Levi Eshkol, Golda Meir, Yitzhak Rabin, and you could go ahead and identify their view of that reality. Menachem Begin walks in with Jewish paranoia. Jewish paranoia. Now it happens to be that sometimes paranoid people are actually chased by others. And that happens to be the case of the people of Israel. In other words, we are paranoid that everyone's out to get us. It happened to be true, right? But we're still, mishugeh as a result. Menachem Begin walks in as a Jew with an understanding and a belief that you could forget about the nations of the world accepting us, period. We're going to be an Am Levadad Yishkan. That's a reality. That's a reality. And therefore he believed that you do not go ahead and make any adjustment. You stick to your belief. You're going to pay a price for it. But this is a reality. This is a belief. This is our homeland. Acceptance is not our goal. Our goal is to be in our homeland. A very, very different outlook. Is our goal of a Jewish state to be accepted, or is our goal to return to our roots and live by our roots? That is what the core of Menachem Begin, and I would want to say the shift, but unfortunately the state of Israel has gone back and forth, and even within the party of Menachem Begin, you take someone like Ariel Sharon, there has been that shift. Stepping back to our Parsha, if the nation of Israel views itself as just an Am, so we're going to go ahead and give credit to Pharaoh. We're going to go ahead and argue that the reason we left Egypt is because of Pharaoh. If, on the other hand, you view yourself as an Am Yisrael, and for those who were on that level that understood that we are a nation due to the fact that we are linked to our roots, for them the Torah would have said, Vahi behotzi Hashem et bnei Yisrael mimitzrayim. No question about that. And even if you study the era leading to the establishment of the Jewish state, right, there were basically three philosophies leading to the establishment of the state. There was the Weizmann philosophy, there was the Ben Gurion philosophy, and you had the Begin philosophy. Jabotinsky was no longer alive in the 40s, and the players were Alta Weizmann, who was already in Alta Yid, Ben Gurion in the middle, and Begin. Weizmann believed deep down that eventually the nations of the world will hand us the right to establish a Jewish state. All we need is patience. And if it takes 20, 30, 40 years, machnesh kinchil. Begin, on the opposite end, believed that they're never going to hand us a Jewish state. We want the British out? Okay, so let's bring some egg jars, or not what egg, milk carts to the King David Hotel, and we'll get rid of the British by that. Ben Gurion was somewhere there in the middle. He was hoping, there was a side of him that was hoping for the Weizmann way, that the nations will go ahead and hand it to us, but at some point he realized that Weizmann is not realistic, and therefore he shifted and was a partner for a short period of time. Until then, they were partners together. It was an 18-month period that they were partners together with the Irgun. So, these are philosophies that relate back to this verse. Vahi Beshalach Paro et ha'am. This is a Chaim Weizmann verse. It's a nation that believes that, yes, there's Jewish identity, we are a nation, but the nations of the world are the ones that are going to determine our freedom and our exodus. And that's the introduction to this week's portion. And therefore, if we need a spiritual freedom, the spiritual freedom will come about when the nation believes in God, when they recognize, you know what, it was God who played that role. All of our freedom is the byproduct of the decision of the higher being. That occurs Kriyas Yamsuf. So therefore we understand why the Exodus is only complete then. Okay, that's more of an introduction to the verse. Now, the song, we know the story of the song. They come, they're surrounded. The people of Israel go into the water. It's interesting that in the Disney movie, Disney, several years ago, put out a movie called The Prince of Egypt, The Prince of Egypt. And, it's Disney style, or Hollywood style. They make some adjustments. But where does the story end? The Disney story, from what I understand, if I remember correctly, it ends with Kriyas Yamsuf. In other words, the Exodus is a complete and a final deal with Kriyas Yamsuf. We, of course, are believers that the Exodus is not complete until Matan Torah. That's, of course, what we have to believe. But the actual Yetziat Mitzrayim is finalized with this song. It's a significant song. Az Yashir, so page 374. Az Yashir Moshe uvnei Yisrael et hashira azot. Then Moshe and the children of Israel chose to sing the song to Hashem. And what was the chorus? Ashira la'Hashem ki ga'a ga'a, sus v'rach vo rama bayam. Ashira la'Hashem ki go'o ga'a. Let us sing to Hashem, for he is exalted over and above the arrogant people. Because Sus, the horse, Verochva, and its rider, the Sus, represented the power of the Egyptians. We were warned that our Jewish kings should not have horses, too many horses, right? Because where would the horses,
Or too many wives.
Or by too many wives, correct. But the wives did not come from Egypt. The horses came from Egypt. And a king who wants to feel that he's a grand and well-respected king, wants to increase his chariots and horses, the only way to do so is have a very strong relationship with the superpower of that time. What was the superpower of that era? Egypt. So therefore, a king is told, listen, you need a few horses, fine, but if you increase the number, that will cause you to want to be linked, to appease, to establish policy based on how the Egyptians see things. You as a nation must be careful not to allow the superpower to dictate your internal and your policies. That's what we are warned in the Torah. The sus was the symbol, the horse was the symbol of power. When the people of Israel see the horses drowning, feeling powerless, the horses being pulled down like a piece of lead, that's when they felt freedom. That superpower, the plane, the F-16, the F-15, is not what's going to bring them about redemption, but freedom comes about when we recognize who we are. Sus verachvo ramabayam. Now, this is a chorus, so therefore the way it worked was probably they would sing Zek Helivan Ve'elokei Aviv Ramamneo, and then they would repeat again Ashira LaShem Ki Goga, right? Sus Verachvo Rama Bayam. That's what they would do over again and again and again. That was the chorus. So everyone probably memorized it. The women played a significant role as well, and they had their song. So you turn to page 380, and they had a similar chorus, same idea. So Miriam on page 380, Miriam HaNeviah, she was the Miriam, the prophetess, right? And she was Achot Aharon. Why is she only Achot Aharon? What about Moshe?
Maybe because she said bad things about Moshe and Tzipporah.
Maybe, that's an approach, that's going to happen later, but it could be that according to rabbinic tradition, she is born first, then Aaron, then the parents split. She had a prophecy that she told her parents that this is awful what you are doing, and I have a sense, I have a feeling, I have a vision that the child that will be born if you reunite will be one that will bring about the redemption. So she had a very significant prophecy when she was only Achot Aharon before Moshe was born. So therefore the Torah mentions it here that she was the one that had this attitude. She had an attitude, by the way, that even if the situation is very, very difficult and bitter, you have to see the good. To do the will of God, now you could go ahead and fulfill the will of God, even in situations that are marred, that are bitter. A very inspiring woman, right? Yes, situations are difficult. Do the right thing and see the hand of God in what's taking place today. What was her song? Vata'an lahem Miriam. So she goes ahead and she sings and guides the women to sing. But there's a small adjustment between the chorus of the men and the chorus of the women inspired by Miriam. And she says, not Ashira Lashem, but rather Shiru Lashem ki go'o ga'a. Sing to Hashem, who is exalted over the arrogant. Exactly the same, just the difference is here it's Ashira, I shall sing, meaning the men, I shall sing. The women, it is Shiru in the present, sing now. What's the difference? Why that adjustment? It's obviously not a coincidence, right? Why the adjustment? Now, Pesach the Yom Tov. The last days of Pesach, we do not sing the whole Hallel. Correct? In other words, day 1, and in exile, day 1 means 2 days. We sing the whole Hallel. After that, we go down to Chatzi Hallel, half of it. We don't find that by Sukkot. By Sukkot, we sing the complete Hallel, all 8 days. Why? In other words, what is it about Pesach?
Well, God's creatures were killed.
Okay, so the Medrash tells us precisely so, that God's creatures are dying on day 7. So Maaseh Yadai Tovim Bayam, God turns to the angels and says, listen, my handiwork, these are humans. Atem Omrim Shira. So, but now, on the other hand, we did sing a song as the Ashir Moshe. We were singing. What's going on here? Do you sing? Do you not sing? We do sing, but God says not to sing. So we have to have appreciation for the fact that we were saved. There's no question about it. We have to show our appreciation. Hava karasatov to the Ribbonu Shel Olam. But we have to recognize at the same time that in Judaism, that is not considered the ideal way of ending enslavement. The ideal way in Judaism that suffering comes to an end is not by the evil beings perishing, but rather by evil doers recognizing that they are doing something wrong. Yitamu chataim mina aretz. We never say that we want the chotim to vanish. We don't want the sinners to vanish. We want the sins of the sinners to vanish. Humanity, and it's a very important role, we recognize the value of every human being. And even when the worst of beings dies, we feel the loss. There was a loss there. Now, such a statement is a dangerous one for some parties and extremely important for others. In other words, if you have liberal tendencies, every Jew has a little liberal within them. Some have a big one within them. Everyone has that little liberal voice. And that little liberal voice is actually an important one. But when it becomes your essence, that Judaism is all about sensitivity towards the other. Never, God forbid, to punish the sinner. Be sensitive even to your enemies. So such voices, if they're not reined in, can become the voices that are extremely pro-Palestinians. If you look on the web and you look at names of Jews who walk around with signs of Free Palestine, who as Gary Diamond mentioned, that he was traveling with their daughter in England, who plays, I don't know if it's the Philharmonic or cello it is, plays Baruch music. So one of her colleagues, one of the daughter's colleagues, was walking around with a big, I don't know if it's a violin or a guitar, and a sticker placed on the case was Free Palestine. And they mentioned, their daughter mentions to them that she's a Jew. And it goes hand in hand. Now, there's no contradiction in England, there are many such people. In the United States, there are many of them, even a few of them here in Canada, that they take that tendency of sensitivity, of the fact that we look at those who cause us harm as humans as well. Fine, that statement we agree with. But if you make them as humans and you humanize their opinions as well, those create self-destructive forces. Because you are valuing not just the humanity of your enemy, you're suddenly starting to value the opinion of the enemy. In Israel, in schools now, there is a push to teach the Nakba. The Nakba. The Nakba is the day the state of Israel was established, and was May 14th, 1948. We call it Yom HaTzmaut. The Muslims many of the Arabs, who had to leave their homes, call it the day of Nakba, the day of the tragedy. Correct? Fine. That's their way of viewing it. They listened to Arab regulars who told them to evacuate until we kill up all the Jews and you could return home. So for them it was a Nakba. Israel schools, part of their curriculum is to study the Nakba, to study the view of the Palestinians that are suffering due to the state of Israel. Now, if you're going to teach it to children, how are you going to ever make them proud of their country or their heritage or link them to their land? It's going to be quite destructive. The problem there is this idea. Yes, you value those who cause you tsares as humans, but that does not mean that you humanize their opinion, their corrupt opinion of you. That has always been an issue that Jews have that tendency to go ahead and see the other opinion, which is magnificent, but then they become linked to that other opinion. There was Carolyn Glick had, for a time being, she was running an online show that was called Latma TV. Latma TV which was very, very funny. What they made the famous clip after the flotilla from Turkey that was trying to break the embargo over Gaza. So they made that famous clip, "We Calm the World." Right? They took the famous song of the 80s of "We Are the World," and the song became "We Calm the World." Basically, there are a bunch of activists trying that we have fooled the world as if we are peace-loving, when the reality is we were people that were holding weapons there, that when the Israeli soldiers came down, we were stabbing them. We calmed the world. So she was behind it. So one of the less known clips was that they're taking this idea of Israeli schools studying about the Nakba, and the theme was to laugh at a curriculum that should be studied in the Jewish state of the awful day of the Umglick, I think they called it, was the Germans' loss and the Nazis' inability to continue killing Jews in May 1945. And they show a German soldier crying his eyes out about that he wanted to kill so many more Jews, and this terrible day of the Umglick happened that we are no longer able to do it. Crying his eyes out, and that should be taught because the German Nazis did suffer 1945 in May because they were no longer able to kill Jews. So they were, of course, it's a parody on what's taking place to the Jews. So we have a statement that for some it's dangerous. For others, I think that elements within the religious Zionists, the elements that have within their communities people that walk into Palestinian villages after a terror attack and damage property, right? Those are the ones that should be taught this message. You know that there's what they call in Israel tag mechir. What? Tag mechira. How do you translate this? A price to pay. That if there is any attack against the people who are living in Yehuda v'Shamron, Judea and Samaria, so they go ahead and they're going to attack innocent Palestinians. It's totally against the values of Torah. And it is a byproduct of, again, there's a lack of balance there the other direction, that they are no longer viewing our people, the Palestinians, as humans. What they should have in their curriculum is this medrash, that you should know, the Rebbeinu Shalom said, you have to go ahead and hold back with song if the Egyptians are suffering. So you have to know every message, you have to know where to place it. It's like everything is a scale. All of education is a scale. And if you put the weights on the wrong side, you're going to create a corrupt being. There's always such a problem. The result is our song here of the Shira is not complete. When is it going to be complete? When can we sing to song? When can we sing to the Almighty a complete song? In the Messianic era, Yemot HaMashiach. An era that, according to our tradition, is not a time when the infidels die. It is a time when humanity recognizes God. That is what we consider a complete song. When are we going to have a full hollow? Right? When are we going to have the ability of Azimales Chotpinu? When can we go ahead and sing a complete song? In the future, when the enemies recognize God and recognize the role of the people of Israel. So there is something incomplete here in the Shira, and therefore there must be a reference to the time when you could sing that complete song. So therefore the chorus, Ashira la Hashem, not that I shall sing now, but there will be a time in the future when indeed I can sing. That's why the men, when they sing their song, they say, yes, we are thankful, but this is not a complete Shira. Complete Shira is Ashira, future tense, when not the enemies are dying, but when the enemies recognize. That's how the men have to do it.
And the women?
But Miriam is different. Miriam has the ability to see suffering, right? See suffering of her own and still see the good in it. She could be in the most difficult of circumstances and say, you know what? It is bitter, but if it's the will of God, I accept it. I accept and I make the right decisions even when things are bitter. Her name indicates that. And the fact that she was able to inspire her parents in the most difficult of times, when babies are being thrown into the Nile, she's able to inspire her parents, you make the right decision. Things are bitter. Nevertheless, I can inspire you to make the right decision, to see God, to see the Almighty, even in situations that are bitter. Now, a person, and the well throughout the years in the wilderness, the well, as we see in this week's Parsha, was bitter waters. They were bitter waters and they became sweet with the word of God, right? Because they come to a place called Marah. The water is bitter. Moshe teaches them some of Torah. That switches the water and makes it sweet. Whose well was it? It's the well of Miriam. She has the ability of telling them that even when things look and appear to be bitter, if you do it for the sake of God, they are sweet. She can look at circumstances that are difficult now and see the unseen. A person that could say regarding themselves that I see the good even when I am suffering has the right to sing when others are suffering. You hear the idea. In other words, I cannot praise God when I'm suffering, so I should have the ability to praise God when others are suffering. Makes sense. But if I am on a high spiritual level, I have the ability to sing, to praise, to recognize God in the bitterness for myself. So if I could do it for myself, I have the right to do it when others are suffering. It doesn't indicate a lack of sensitivity. Because if I can do it for myself, it means that I'm conditioned in a way that I could go ahead and appreciate, see, feel the good even when I'm suffering. So even when the Egyptians are suffering, Miriam has the ability to say, not just Ashira, but even Shira la Hashem. That's what Miriam is able to do. And therefore we have this significant adjustment between the chorus of the men, who are not on that level. If they would be suffering, they couldn't sing, so they cannot sing completely when others are suffering. And Miriam, who has the ability to sing that song when she is suffering, therefore she could say, Shira la Hashem. Okay, that's what we have there. Now, their first stop afterwards, they come to a place that is called Elima. This is on page 382. And in Elim, they come to Elim. And in Elim, they find 12 springs corresponding to 12 tribes of Israel. And they also find there 70 date palms. What does that symbolize? Sanhedrin. The elders, the Sanhedrin, the teachers. Why specifically the date? Why specifically dates? are symbolized by the elders. So if you look at the verse beforehand, God tells them, listen, in verse 26, you people just saw the Egyptians vanishing. You just had a personal challenge that you traveled 3 days with no water, and now I gave you water. We derive from that we should not have 3 days going by without Kriyas HaTorah, right? We cannot survive physically without that water for 3 days. We cannot survive spiritually without Torah. What they were given in this location called Mara was not just sweet water, but they were given laws. Torah was given to them. There are sections of Torah. Laws, the laws of Shabbos. According to some Paraduma, some others say it's Kibbur Avayim. Whatever it is, there are specific laws that were handed to the people of Israel in this place called Mara. And if you read verse 26, it becomes clear that we are talking about laws handed, because God says to them, "Vayomer im shamoa tishma lekol Hashem Elokecha." If you heed and you turn into the voice of God, "Vayashar benav ta'aseh," and you do that which is right in His eyes, so you should know. And also, shamarta kol chukav, and you're going to observe all the ordinances and decrees. Then I will not place upon you those ailments that was placed upon the Egyptians. Why does this verse talk about laws? Obviously, laws were given to them there. And it's the beginning of the process of Kabbalat Torah begins right then. Now, to have a Kabbalat Torah, to have Torah, we cannot do it without guidance. The guidance comes from elders. So therefore you have reference in next verse to number 1. There are 12 springs corresponding to the fact that Jews are different. There are different traditions and different backgrounds. And therefore there are 12 springs. But in addition, there are 7 palm trees. Now, when we talk about the oral tradition, we are always guided through Babylonian Talmud. What was the fruit of choice in Iraq? The dates. The dates. One of my favorite stories in the Talmud is the Ula story, right? How Ula comes to Babylonia and he sees in the marketplace this gigantic basket of dates, and he asks for a price, and they say you could buy for 1 zuz, like for a nickel. A nickel. He was amazed, and he's eating the dates, the sweetest of Iraqi dates. He's eating them one after the other, and he asks himself, what's with these Babylonian Jews? If dates are so cheap, they should be learning Torah day and night, correct? Now that night, he was suffering from a very severe case of diarrhea, and he said to himself, these Babylonian Jews, it's amazing that they learn anything here with the type of food that they eat. In other words, he overdid it. That's what the Talmud and its humor with the dates. But dates symbolize the sweetness of Torah, and it sustains us. It's well known that there are many great nutrients that could, what other word am I looking for here? That the dates provide. So dates symbolize what oral tradition gives us, and therefore the number 70 here is referred to as the Tmarim. Moshe Rabbeinu, by the way, he is buried mul Yericho. Jericho is known as the city of wall and dates. Ir HaTmarim. Ir HaTmarim. There's actually a tradition that in the land of Israel we always talk about the 7 nations that existed there before the Jews entered Eretz Yisrael. On the other hand, if you look in the book of Yehoshua, there's reference to not 7 nations that were present there, but rather 31. 31 nations? Were there 7 or 31? So the commentators explain that the land of Israel was prized by many, many nations, and therefore they had embassies there. They had land that belonged to them. And they felt that they are in a significant nation if you have a land in Israel. And by the way, this was done in the 18th and 19th century as well. You have even today a place called Migrash Harusim, an area that the Russian Orthodox Church, I think, owned. So they had little areas in Israel controlled by them. How many nations had such areas? 31. The nation that lived at that time in Iraq, in Bavel, had control over the region of Jericho. And therefore, Yericho is a city of dates because Bavel was a city of dates. And if that symbolizes the oral tradition, Moshe Rabbeinu, by the way, is buried Mul Yericho. Their entry into the land of Israel was by Jericho. And that's teaching us that we enter into the land of Israel as our land 100% so. But you have to remember that it's with our link to the oral tradition that gives us the ability and the right to live there. I thank you for coming out in the cold, and we'll see you, Be'ezras Hashem, next week.